of Schmelson illustration. My favorite color is purple and I enjoy creating art. And in today's video I am doing a speed paint or showing you the process of my latest acrylic painting project, a bird bouquet. I'm very excited about it. I do have to start off by apologizing. I'm not the best with technology, and in order to film or record me creating my acrylic piece, I didn't want to do it with my phone, which I'm recording on now, which has a pretty solid quality. So I was using my boyfriend's web camera that I did not know how to change any of the video quality settings on. So right now we're looking at some dim lighting, a little bit of blurriness, but later I figure it out, and then this box of me will kind of disappear and we'll get to focus a little bit more on the artwork. I just wanted to stop by and say hello, just because, yeah, my frame size was off, and just this is my fix for it. So I apologize for that. Anyway, the reason I'm doing this painting is because it's kind of an inspiration or an homage to a previous piece I had done called Fish Bouquet. Bird bouquet, fish bouquet. I did the original fish bouquet back in high school, so 2015 I believe. It was drawn instead of painted, and it was drawn with colored pencil, just a mixture of Prismacolor pencils and then just kind of whatever else I had on hand. But the point of the fish bouquet is to juxtapose a regular floral bouquet that would have like the roots hanging in the bottom of the vase and then just water with a betta fish in it, which I think is absolutely beautiful. And I wanted to flip it, so instead of the fish being in the bottom, it is on the top where the flowers are, just because fish are beautiful, they're stunning, they're just as exciting and colorful and as exotic as a lot of flowers can be. And so I thought I just would flip that, and then I put a flower in the vase. And years later, 2019, 2020, I've moved into my own home, or my own place, with my boyfriend, and we wanted to decorate the walls, and we wanted to decorate the walls with that fish bouquet that we've just kind of loved and enjoyed over the years. And we wanted to put it up on the wall, but it's a tall, skinny piece, and it doesn't really fill up the wall very well. So we decided it needed a brother. And Cameron, my boyfriend, had the wonderful idea that I should paint it instead of doing colored pencils. And let me tell you, I was extremely intimidated by that, because it has been years since I've done any kind of acrylic painting. In high school, that was like my choice medium that I understood and got before I ever even delved into digital artwork, which now is what I've been working on to try and get better at, as that's kind of how the world is turning digital. So I was very intimidated to go back into this, and I was like almost mad at him, because I was like, this is going to be the biggest project ever. I don't know if I even want to do it. It's going to be so intimidating. But we do it anyway, much to my chagrin, and I have been loving it. It's been so much fun. It was so great to get back into the acrylic painting, and it's been a success for me. I'm probably going to be doing a lot more acrylic painting moving forward, but I'm very happy that I did choose to do acrylic painting. Moving on, I did want to touch on the medium, or the supplies that I utilize. This is all painted on a canvas board. It's by Master Touch Fine Art Studios, just kind of a basic one you can get at Michael's or Hobby Lobby. It's specifically an 18 by 24 canvas board, and I will be customizing it and cutting it down to a 12-inch by 24 just to keep it tall and skinny, just like the other original piece. Next, I do have a consistent type of paints that I use. I've been using Golden Artist colors. But this is a great brand. I used it in college. That was kind of like what was in the art store for everybody to kind of go and stock up on for each painting project. And this is specifically a heavy body acrylic versus like one of the more fluid, has more water in it, or whatever medium that is, to kind of make it more fluid for like pour canvases. So this is pretty thick, dries really, really quick, and that works best for me. And so I start off with titanium white, Mars black, cyan, primary cyan, primary magenta, and primary yellow. I stick with those primary colors to make any color, kind of like a printer would. So that's the kind of CMYK, the cyan, magenta, yellow for Y, and then I don't know what K is. I think K is black, but we use Mars black here. And So those are the paints that I use, and honestly it's a great starting point because paints can be expensive, but if you start with the primary colors you can make any color from that. It takes a little practice with the color theory to find the exact points for those, but it's definitely a feasible thing to do. I have a pretty consistent amount of paintbrushes that I use. I have a flat brush that is Cornell 2050. It's old, it's destroyed. The brand probably isn't even relevant anymore, but that's what that is. And then these are, I love this. I bought them twice because there's two of them now. It's by Saks True Flow 404640. I don't know if that's relevant or not, but I've destroyed them. They are frayed, and when I fill them with water, they kind of get to a point, but then dry, they're frayed, and it kind of works for me. I've figured out how to utilize them. And then I also use this itsy bitsy tiny little paintbrush for the finer details with a very wet paint. It's Dynasty 2157. Oh, and here we are flipping over into the much better quality. So let me switch some things around and we'll get set up so you can watch a lot closer up of the painting process. Okay, and we are back. I know we just got over discussing the materials, and then of course I also utilized paper and pencil for my original sketch. I do want to take a moment to discuss realism as a whole and how intimidating that can be. Like, not like for myself, like, oh my gosh, I did this cool thing of realism or whatever, but like, I feel like when people try to take on the task of painting something or drawing something realistic, they get really discouraged because this, that, or the other thing isn't perfect. And that's frustrating, that's discouraging, and it makes you want to stop. And I'd like to encourage you not to stop. Because a lot of times those tiniest of details don't matter. Unless, of course, you're painting a portrait of someone specifically. Then, yeah, you need to get those little details nice and accurate. Or throw them into your own style and break those rules of anatomical accurateness and make it yours, which can sometimes be a really incredible thing and what people look for. But I mentioned that with the sketching because this final painting and all these little details are probably 5 times removed from the original reference that's found on like Instagram or Pinterest or Google or whatever. Like seriously, I do have a Pinterest board, which I will link below for Schmelson illustration. So you can go and check my references, and you can go and check and see that things are very different from what is on there. Like, not to the aspect of like I totally changed the color of the parrot, like it was blue before and it's red now. No, not that type of thing. I mean more of like the subtle, how big is the wing compared to the other wing? What's the angle of it? Oh, it got switched over. Oh, I don't have nearly as many feathers, or the feathers aren't in the same shape as the original reference. And you could get really intimidated and just like not even finish the project because of that. And a lot of people do, and I want to encourage you not to, because I take those original reference, so that's level 1 from Pinterest, put it on a Photoshop or some sort of digital editing software, and move everything around because it's like one picture of a bird, of a parrot, then another picture of a flamingo, and I throw them all together and give myself a composition to go off of. So that's number 2. And then we have the actual sketch where it's actually my interpretation through my hand on a piece of paper. That's number 3. And then I take that sketch and I do a loose drawing on the canvas. Very loose. You can't get a lot of detail on a bumpy canvas. Very hard. But usually when I'm drawing that random sketch on the canvas to get like general shapes, it's like I'm only looking at my original sketch, because that's the only thing that like has everything included, and that's the only thing I can like go like almost trace quality with, just to get some kind of consistency. But I'm not looking at that original reference from Pinterest, and there are things that totally get like off kiltered, or the angle gets weird on, or something gets bigger than the other, or it's moved too far to the left. Those types of things, they just get totally different. And then when I actually apply paint and I'm at the like final like this or nothing phase, I'm only usually looking at that original sketch, or I might be looking at the original Pinterest picture and I'm like, oh, that's totally off. oops, I totally messed that up, or like, oops, that's totally different, but it still looks like a bird, and that's really all that matters. Like, the anatomy of the parrot's neck is like completely off from the original reference, but it still looks like a parrot. That's all it needs to do. So don't like get hung up on those little tiny details and make that stop you from finishing a piece. Like, it is great to take note of those and be accurate, and if you can use that as like a motivation to be better and learn from those little like continuities, then go for it. But if it's like stopping you from making a piece, like, I just want to encourage you to push past that like insecurity and that fear and just totally go for it. And feel free to go on my Pinterest board and check out the original references of these birds and see how completely different they are, because there's a lot of differences. Shameless plug. I always post my final pieces on Instagram and a couple other behind the scenes stuff, especially on the stories. I have so much fun with stories. And the parrot's face that I don't show in this video, I do paint it, and the flower that I do later on. And I posted that to Instagram. So Instagram TV or Insta TV, it's on there if you really want to go find it. But I do little behind the scenes sneak peek stuff over on Instagram, so go support there. Or you can find some prints of ours on Etsy, and then also show some support on Ko-fi or Coffee. I have no idea how you pronounce it, but I think it's a cute little idea. You go and donate like $3, the price of a coffee, to whoever you want, just to support them. It's a nice thing to do. But that's all linked below if you'd like to stop by. A big thing with acrylic paint, I think, is whether you're using a wet brush or a dry brush, and like knowing when to use one or the other. On the flamingo, you can see it the best. I use the dry brush for those little tiny feathers on like the neck and the head. You get a little blob in a random shape that looks like feathers because it's like randomized and like looks organic and whatnot, but I didn't have to go into super detail with it. It's just literally kind of stippling it, dotting them on there. And that's best to utilize with a dry brush. It keeps it farther apart. You're not like picking up pigment with the water or anything. It just all stays there, and it's kind of like a stamp almost. And it's also good for like doing transitions, because you can do that dotting effect. And if you've got like one color or a base color and you're adding just a little bit of white and yellow to lighten and brighten the color, you just go a really slow transition and just do those dots and blobs to get to like the next color, and continue to do that with a gradual phase or like transition. And even though you're doing a really harsh shape with those like heavy blobs or daubs, you don't see it as much, or you're not perceiving it through the eye, because the color transition is so subtle that it just looks like a smooth transition. So that's kind of how I get my blending effect. I do it dry, or I'll even like dip my paintbrush into the paint, smudge a little bit off onto my palette just so that there's only a tiny bit of paint, and just like brush it over lightly whatever I'm working on. Just very subtle. Great way to do a transition, or just slightly change the color of something you're going on instead of like completely going over it with a new color. So that's how I utilize like the dry brush. If I need to get more specific and do like long lines or just a smooth, consistent width of whatever, that's when I'm using a wet brush. And I might make things wet, like if the paint that I'm working on to transition colors, if that's still wet, I will continue to use add water to make that transition blend and meld together. But that's just kind of how it's different. Those daubs and blobs, that's how I transition with acrylic, because things dry so quickly compared to oil paintings where that blending is a lot smoother and cohesive, or however you want to use that, just because everything is and stays so wet and blends so smoothly. That's just how the two are different. But yeah, so wet brush, I like to do that for the small thin lines, especially on the purple bird, in the plum area where you see the lighter whiter lines that outline the feather. Like that, I used a color and I used my thinnest brush, and I put a lot of water on there to keep better control. Like I showed you the two paintbrushes I have, or that I have a duplicate of, that I showed you in the beginning of the video. Those, if I were to just go on without wetting it down, the frayed edges, how wide they are, you would not be able to predict what's going to happen or what you're going to lay down. which is fine when you're just randomly blotting and blobbing things. But if you want to get a consistent line, not the way to go. So add water, make it heavier. That's just how I do that. Okay, so we're moving on to the vase here. Vases are hard. My goodness, you're drawing a clear substance with like a physical opaque. The biggest trick with vase, especially with a white background, since you're not like just bouncing off of a reflection to like mimic or morph that to make it look like it's available. But I've got a white background. So to show that light is going through something, I just did a blue, yellow, white, and gray. Very, very little yellow, just to kind of like make it more mute instead of obviously blue. And the biggest trick is to not have consistent lines. Like if I'm going to draw this if I'm going to draw see-through glass, or in front of a white backdrop in pen or pencil, I'm going to, like in the corner connected piece, like where the wall meets the floor essentially, I'm going to draw 3 or 4 lines that make that little corner, but have none of them connect and touch each other. That is how you kind of see like, oh, there's an outside part, and oh, there's an inside part, and that's got like a definite line, and then there's some light kind of traveling in between there, but they don't connect because it's a clear substance. And that's kind of like the best way that I made it look like glass, and for anybody who's trying to paint glass, and also paying attention to the highlights or the like reflected bits in the background with the like circular blobs, is to have a definite line to make the shape, have it warped with the shape of the glass. So say that those shapes are coming from like more of like a rectangular shape, it looks rounded off because it's being reflected on a round vase. And then the colors on the inside fade and kind of transition into that clear glass white color. Now we're moving on to my lovely blobs of yellow birds. They were fun to make. They were kind of difficult because they had a lot of color to them, so they transitioned a lot. And so that transition, because remember the blob and daubing technique, I've got to come up with a better word for that. But the transition or the gradient between the colors looks great. It's a great transition. It makes sense. However, the little blobs that would also look more definitive as feathers are now just getting lost because all you see is the transition of colors instead of like, oh, here's a random shape that's, oh, be perceived as a feather. So I kind of just ride with it being giant transition of beautiful color, kind of like a rainbowy bird. And then at the end, I get to kind of way more define those yellow feathers on the back with a sharper ridge of the green underneath it, and adding a white highlight to them to really define that border of the feathers. And then the little more defined lines from the beak and the face just really kind of help it look like birds. And the fact that it's surrounded by birds really, really helps. So that is kind of how I surpassed that challenge, is making those feathers or those wings on the back, that ending line, get really defined. And as I mentioned before, I do end up painting the flowers and adding a glare in front of the flowers, just kind of push the flower back into the background so that you pay attention to the birds a little bit more. But if you want to see how I do that, that is over on Instagram. But here's the final piece. I absolutely love it. I am so glad with how it turned out, the vibrancy of the colors and all the shapes of the birds. And I'm so excited with all these vibrant, crazy colors. It turned out great. If you like the video, if you like this painting, go over and give it some love on Instagram or put a like down below on this video. Feel free to subscribe if you want to see any more of my videos. I plan to have a bigger presence on YouTube and share more behind the scenes and what I'm working on. Thank you so much for watching, especially getting if you got all the way to the end. This was a long video, but it was a very big project, so I appreciate you watching and hopefully you enjoyed. I'll see you in the next video. Thanks. Bye.